I'm sorry.
It's like, no,
Did I cut you off?
no, it's fine. You're good. You're good.
Okay, so it's at 2:05. We're gonna get started. I know that we have a lot of people participating by video. Thank you all for joining us, whether you're here in person or remotely. It's obviously the October 3rd meeting of the Judicial Branch's Access to Justice Commission. We have the agenda was provided to everybody, and as we're draft minutes from our last meeting on July 9th. So I'd like to start with the first agenda item, which is the review and approval of the minutes. There a motion.
Hello.
It's Spader moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion regarding the minutes? None. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Or raise your hand remotely. Any opposed? All right, minutes are passed. All right, the next item on our agenda is Zach Zarnow. Zach is with the Justice Resources Group. Is that the
Team
right
group.
team group of the National Center for State Courts? He lives in Middletown. So although he travels throughout the United States, and only he's going to Toronto as well for Access to Justice Forum, we're lucky to have him in our backyard. So I thought I would take advantage of his willingness to come and talk to us a little bit about what the National Center is doing. And hopefully each of our subcommittees can use Zach as a resource as we start doing our planning of initiatives that we want to pursue. Zach, I'll give you the floor, and if you can tell us all about kind of what's going on, and then make sure you give everybody your contact information so we can track you down and get your help.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled the commission's back up and running. I was trying to be a hanger on when it was my time here, new in Connecticut, and then joined the National Center. When I started there, for those of you who I've met before, there were 3 of us doing access to justice work way back then when we first met. Now there are 18 of us. So the team has grown quite a bit. We're covering a lot of ground. We are working nationally, so there's a lot going on. And I, as the Chief mentioned, I live in Middletown, and I'm just excited to be here and happy to help however I can. So I'll certainly give you my email address, and would love to be a resource to you in any way I can be useful. And that includes the rest of the access team at the National Center. I thought I'd give you like 3 kind of big buckets of some of the work we're doing now as a useful starting point. But as noted, there's plenty of other work going on. The first area where we're doing a lot of work is around how courts are communicating with their court users. And we're doing that in a number of ways. We've been doing some work redesigning websites. For example, took the Philadelphia Municipal Court website from a 12th grade reading level to a 5th grade reading level, made it mobile friendly, brought it up to all its latest accessibility standards, and then also did stuff like group information in a way that was less about trying to sort the law and more about trying to sort the person. So if you come to the civil section of the website and you're involved in a debt collection case, if you say you're trying to start a case, you get information. If you say you're responding to a case, you get information. And that information is different because you are different. And just making those small changes has, from our user testing, told us people are much, much happier with being able to navigate these resources because the standard mode is sort of a big list of forms or a huge PDF. And when you think about it, most people don't actually need all of those possible scenarios because they really only want to figure out their own problems. So we've been rethinking that, and we're kind of structuring things in a way that sorts the person into the right buckets rather than trying to conform the whole court system around whoever they might be. We're also doing work in that same big area of communicating with court users around forms. We have Forms Camp. I'm a camp counselor. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, and this year we're focused on family law forms, but we've opened it up to courts. We have 9 that are participating at the moment. They bring their team, we bring our counselors. We have plenary sessions on accessibility, automation, plain language design, and usability. And then we work intensely with them on how can we actually revise your forms for those guiding principles. At the end, they walk away with actual updated forms. And then the last area in this kind of communicating with court users, which is a little bit more cutting edge, is we started piloting these things we're calling digital assistants. This isn't AI. It's not that cutting edge, and that's on purpose because AI has got some real challenges and some concerns around it. But similar to redesigning the websites that people are getting information they want, these are online tools that you interact with. You tell it about yourself or what's going on, and then it tells you what your options are. So it's not providing legal advice, it's just providing legal information, but it's further tailoring it to the person. So an example would be in Philadelphia again, where we got some real traction. We have two that are live, one around debt cases, and one around landlord tenant cases. For debt cases, what we heard was people get something from the court and then they don't quite understand what it all means. So that particular tool helps you. You sit there with the tool and the documents from the court. You tell it about yourself and about the documents, and then it tells you what's going on. If you see the thing, my hearing was 3 weeks ago, the tool will say to you, you are probably at risk of having a default judgment. Here's what your options are. If you tell it it's in 3 days, it might say, here's how you can think about whether you want to reschedule that or not. So it's got some intelligence behind it, but what it does is it gives you a takeaway document that says, here are your options based on what you told us. And it's got simple stuff like, here's a picture of the court, because most people don't know which building they're going to. Here's what floor you're supposed to go to based on what you told us. So it's just using a little bit of information to give people customized information back. But the difference between that and the 150-page PDF that lays out every possible debt case scenario is huge. So the other one's a landlord tenant designed to be entered at any point in the system. You could have a landlord verbally telling you, I'm going to kick you out, all the way to you've got an actual judgment against you for statement actions in your housing. And anywhere in between, you kind of enter the system where it feels right to you. So more on the cutting edge side, but I mentioned that last one in particular because we're still looking for jurisdictions who'd like to try that. And we have some funding to support building. The next big bucket, rather quickly, is diversion. We're working a lot in diversion programs. Some of you are familiar with our eviction diversion program. That's something that we raised almost $15 million to support. And we've been giving the money away to courts in 22 jurisdictions to help them rethink how to do evictions. It comes with data collection. It comes with hiring staff on a sustainable model so that they can kind of support it through the budgeting process. 22 courts are involved in that. We've got a final report coming out in the next 6 to 9 months. Some of the results are astounding. If I do say so myself, 90% of people enrolled in these programs are not actually getting evicted, or they're finding themselves with better housing situations as a result of this. Enrolling in financial counseling, we're layering in resources like social workers, financial counseling, legal aid, really trying to rethink how evictions work. In addition to that, we're just generally helping courts think through their diversion programs. We have a grant from the Pew Charitable Trust. Again, we're looking for courts that are interested in partnering on this, where our time's covered. So we would work with you to just really think about your diversion program in some area of law on the civil side of things. How's it working and what could be better? It's really just like a friendly audit, essentially, giving courts useful information they can use to fine-tune operations. And then the last big bucket, and I'm happy to answer any questions, it's just around general technical assistance. So for those who aren't as familiar with the National Center for State Courts, you can think of it as like a trade association for courts. Our goal is to disseminate best practices, do technical assistance, sort of be with you as partners in education and improving operations in a lot of ways. And we're also the secretariat for the Conference of Chief Justices and Conference of State Court Administrators. And I have the privilege of working with Chief Justice Robinson, who's been the chair of our Access and Fairness Commission. So part of that thing is technical assistance. We love just helping courts. We're helping some courts right now think through navigator programs. We're helping some others think through actual physical spaces. In the world of remote hearings, in a world where you're gathering community feedback, what does your courthouse actually need to look like? What hours do you want to operate in? Do you offer alternative hours? What kinds of amenities might you want to include? Like lactation areas and Zoom rooms for people who don't have internet at home, things like that. And likewise, around this technical assistance, another area we've been doing a lot is on self-help centers. How can we help people think through their self-help centers? What sort of materials do they want to create? What's the best way to create something like that? That was a lot of information. Like I said, I'll give you all my email address, but our website you can go to right now to see pretty much all of this. It's just NCSC, National Center for State Courts, ncsc.org/A, and then the number 2J, Access to Justice. That's got pretty much all of it there. But I'll be happy to answer any questions you have now or later.
Anybody have any questions? I'll start. Okay. So in terms of the general technical assistance, you had mentioned kind of friendly audits where you're doing diversion type stuff. Do you do the same thing for the general technical assistance? If we said to you, hey, we'd like you to come to the courthouse in Rockville and take a look around and let us know what you think about what we're doing right, what we could be doing better.
Yeah, we do all. So we have to cover our costs in some ways. So we either go with you to find a funder. We work a lot with the State Justice Institute to secure funding. I love finding grants like from the Pew Charitable Trust. We have a pretty broad purview, and in that instance, we can do a lot of things around whatever the priorities are in the grant. So yes.
Okay. And then on the efforts you made in Philadelphia with the digital access and the communications with court users, how long did that process take and what type of resources were involved?
Good questions. The digital assistants, in particular, we prepaid for the license so that the court doesn't have to worry about that, with the goal of giving them multiple years of runway to determine whether it's something they can maintain, whether it's something that's working, and whether it's something they want to budget for. The good news about those, it costs about $2,000 a year in a licensing fee, so relatively inexpensive from a technical standpoint. To build one of those takes some work. You really got to take a process, pick it apart, talk to a bunch of court users and court staff, and really figure out where are the pain points, where do people get into trouble, what areas are the sticky points, right? Because the goal is when it's designed well, it helps the court user, but it also helps the court staff. You're getting fewer questions and fewer phone calls, you're getting better questions and better phone calls. Maybe your filing rejection rates go down because people are better prepared when they're entering their information in. So those take anywhere from 6 months to a year to really build the right way. And I think it's about the same for the website.
And was it internal IT people for the court system there that helped build stuff? Or was it center staff or combination? Or?
Yeah, a combination. We want to work with the IT staff because the goal is not to create something that the court can't actually maintain or own, right? So you want to sort of a build it and give it away model. We're internally quite capable of building the digital assistants now. We have a lot of experience building those sorts of tools with this particular platform. And then when it came to the website, we actually worked with an outside vendor as well. We used some of our funding to pay for that so it didn't cost the court anything. And collaborating with their IT staff around their larger requirements. Because the municipal court website lives within their first judicial district, so they didn't have total autonomy to change things and work with them.
So I think in particular, I mentioned, I think the Zach and the Access to Justice team can provide assistance to all of the subcommittees, but particularly the thing he was talking about today for the self-represented subcommittee and, you know, kind of what we do as the getting over the obstacles to accessing the courts and even the legal aid subcommittee during the meeting they were talking about many of the same things the self-represented group was talking about. So there may be some overlap there, and we want to try to focus those efforts and work collaboratively with Zach and his team to see what we can take advantage of. And so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel and build on what they've done and the experience they've had in building in other places.
Yeah, and we've got all the standard like big reports on the best way to make a chatbot, the best way to make self-help materials, the best way to think about alternative court hours, the best way to think about inclusive language, which are on that website. But as the chief mentioned, I would be happy to just connect you with whoever would be useful, whether it's us or other jurisdictions working on a similar issue. So.
Well, because that's what I was just about to ask. Because
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the issues we're looking at in the subcommittees are not unique to Connecticut. Because it's not really based on Connecticut law. It's based on the user experience and based upon, you know, the same individual that is having an issue in Philadelphia regarding debt collection is going to be the same type of individual that has an issue in Connecticut. So you've already done a lot of the research. You probably have a lot of material. I haven't gone to the website, but I'm sure you have the materials that our subcommittees can look at because you've done this research on some of these issues. So I'm sure that's what we're going to find on the website or the resources that we're looking at some of these issues.
Yeah, and we're not proprietary. So if I got it, I'll give it to you. And if I don't have it, I'll figure out who else might be able to connect you with. But Krista knows I'm desperate to do work in Connecticut. I've inserted myself into an electronic records destruction and retention policy project just because it was in this building. So I know nothing about that stuff. It's my backyard, so I'd be thrilled to help anywhere.
And I'm sure that when there are probably, whether it's staff, IT, judges in other jurisdictions who have taken ownership of some of these projects who are probably thrilled with the opportunity to share it with us and with other jurisdictions as we would be if people asked us about stuff we were doing. And right.
Chief, I'm sorry for walking late.
That's okay.
Great to meet you and hear the conversation. Brian Clayton with me at Quinnipiac. I was just curious at the degree to which you may have covered this, like your work maps onto or not. I noticed the website cites to like the CLEAR committee on licensure reform and how, if at all, sort of the technical pieces of your work snaps into that effort. Because it is under the banner of Access to Justice Big Picture, so I'd love to hear your.
Can you just talk about what the CLEAR committee is?
Well,
Yeah, I could, yeah, so that is under the umbrella of the Access to Justice team. It's the Commission on Legal Education and Admission Reform. Comes out of the sort of Supreme Court's ability to regulate the practice of law and our interest in thinking with the courts around, are there ways to increase the production of attorneys in some ways, right? We all have a legal access to justice crisis. There are legal deserts, there are gaps in the market. So this is an effort to really think what parts of the bar exam are working or not working, what parts of legal education are working or not working. We're hosting listening sessions around the country. There's one coming up in Boston, in the Northeast, but they're all over the place. It's being led by the committee whose names you can see there. It's a bunch of chiefs and deans and all the people that are involved in this stuff on the day-to-day, but our team is staffing it. I'm not personally on that project, but a good number of our team members are. And we're looking for innovative ways to think about this. So I'd love to connect with you and connect with them if you're interested.
well, I should own my bias. I'm on the committee.
Perfect.
So, but I was curious about the technical component.
Oh, I see.
Because in my mind, it's interesting to hear you talk about, but how do you snap in your work with licensure as an access frame?
Yeah, and we're not sure yet, right? The first step is like, let's do the committee work, get a report together, and then really think about what those recommendations may or may not be. And then the next step is, yeah, so our team does research, does technical assistance, and then it staffs sort of larger national projects to take a look at issues that are of importance.
That's great. Thank you. Sure.
Does anything else? No? All right. Well, thanks, Zach, for coming and giving us a brief overview of the type of stuff you're working on right now. I'm sure that you will be hearing from many people on this commission. And as we discussed, please feel free to hang around and come to as many meetings as you can.
Deal. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so the next item on the agenda is this discussions of the subcommittees. I know the subcommittees, Matt, I was able to attend 3 or 4 meetings. Very impressed by the thought that people gave into how to go forward with the committees, and I've asked each of the chairs to do a brief summary of what their first meetings produced, or what discussions were at those first meetings, and kind of what the next steps are, and anything else you want to add. So we'll start with the pro bono subcommittee. Stuart.
Wasn't sure if I could unmute myself. All right, so for those of you who don't know me, I am Judge Elizabeth Stewart, and I'm the chair of the pro bono subcommittee. We did meet a couple of weeks ago. We had almost everybody. So after going around the table, so to speak, and introducing ourselves, and in particular informing everyone what, if any, connection we had to pro bono work, we then dug into it. My thinking for the first meeting was that we would try to figure out what is already out there, so that we were not unnecessarily reinventing the wheel, and so that we could pull what is out there in terms of knowledge together before our second meeting and have a floor to build on. So in particular, we talked about the demand for pro bono work, what type of work, who in particular needs help, and information on what pro bono work is available if you're a lawyer who's inclined to do some of that work. So the members of the committee are submitting to Damon Goldstein, who is my fantastically able assistant, the information that they already know about, so we can pull that together. We also talked about the other side of the equation, and that is supply. In particular, we talked about private practice. A number of the members of the committee, of course, are in private practice, and in-house lawyers, government lawyers, and law schools. And I know, yes, there is a bit of an overlap with one or more of the other committees in that regard. But we just wanted to get a sense of who is out there who either already is doing pro bono work, and what untapped people are out there who could be doing it. Basically, we want to broaden participation and deepen participation. We had a brief conversation. I expect we're going to talk a lot more about this on what right now is working and what is not working One takeaway I had from what is working is the things with the greatest participation are those things which are short-term, kind of low commitment tasks, which is all and good. But sometimes, as we all know, those of us who've done pro bono work, it isn't all short-term and low commitment. And we're going to be talking in the future more about how to better bring together and match supply and demand. So as I said, we're pulling together a list of what people on that call knew about that's out there in terms of resources, in terms of information about demand, information about supply, and information about websites and other things that are out there that provide information on either side of that equation. Don't hesitate I should have brought Attorney Goldstein's, I think he said, I think it's just damon.goldstein@judct.gov. But if to volunteer to send him some information, don't worry that we might already have it, because obviously he can take care of that. But it would be very helpful to us if anybody has that's not on the committee and that has some thoughts about that information. That would be great. So I will keep you posted as we go along.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions for Judge Stewart or anything else anybody wants to add? I want to add just one thing, because I think it actually was a question that was asked at another subcommittee meeting, and that was about mandatory pro bono. And is there a mandatory pro bono requirement? I never thought about a mandatory pro bono requirement. We have, whenever anyone has suggested that any effort we're doing is the first step towards mandatory pro bono, I've said, no, that's absolutely not true. Several years ago, we just decided to include as part of the annual attorney registration process a survey just asking people, are you doing pro bono? And people said, aha, this is the first step towards mandatory pro bono. And we said, no, we're just trying to figure out, how much pro bono is being done and where we might be able to fill it in. So I've tried to make it clear to everybody, and I think if anyone suggests to you that the fact that we're talking about pro bono means that we're heading down this track toward mandatory pro bono, that's not the case. My general view is that you can't force people to do good things. If you force people to do pro bono work, the quality of the pro bono work won't be great, and you're better off explaining the case for why people should want to do pro bono work. And there's a very good case to make in that regard. But that's the only thing that I wanted to add, because I said when someone raised it at the other meeting, that I would provide a thorough explanation as to why I don't want anyone of us to suggest that we're thinking about mandatory pro bono. All right.
Agreed. I think we just want to expand the volunteerism.
Yeah, and there's so much benefit lawyers get out of doing pro bono work that it's just a matter of us explaining that, and then the lawyers who have done pro bono explaining to their colleagues why it's such a worthwhile thing to do. Okay, second is the Self-Represented Access Issues Subcommittee. Demiola.
Hi, everyone. We're having a good day. Fair warning, Zach, I'll be calling you and reaching out and trying to set up a meeting.
Love it.
Good to see you. Good to see you again.
Too.
So we met on September 17th. Similar to the other committee, most members were there. We introduced ourselves. We talked about briefly about the charge, and then dove into a conversation about what are some of those barriers to access. And there's a number of different buckets. One, access to the court sort of physically, where are your courthouses located within particular jurisdictions? How easy is it, or how difficult is it for individuals to actually get there based on their, whether they have a car, whether they drive, what are the access routes? The other was around the hours of the courthouses. Should we have staggered hours? Should we have extended hours? What could that look like for those individuals who are trying to get to our courthouses and access everything that we have? Some of the conversation revolved around notice requirements. Yes, things are mailed to individuals, but for those in particular who have housing insecurity. What does it look like when your address changes? And are there other ways that we can get information out to individuals, including use of text messaging or emails that may be more consistent in terms of individuals looking at their cell phones to the extent that they have them? Can we create systems whereby we use a traveling courthouse or a bus, much like Unite CT, used for certain areas to make the court more accessible? And we talked a bit about demonstrative justice and bringing justice and the courts to individuals, in particular those in communities and in situations where they're not close to the courthouses, or they have other issues that prevent them from getting to us. We talked about that, the public information desk. And in thinking about sort of all these barriers, I think something that Attorney Bell said in our meeting really stuck. It's not just about bringing people to our courthouses, but what are we providing those folks once they get to our courthouse in terms of that knowledge gap? And that knowledge gap could be pretty steep. I think, Zach mentioned reducing the education level in sort of the access to a website. And what does it look like for those individuals who have the inability to read or the inability to comprehend legalese, and so what can we do, if anything, to sort of change that? So some talked about sort of, I keep saying amending or editing, but really making forms, in particular trial management orders, standing orders, making them more user-friendly for the litigants, in particular those self-represented litigants who are coming into our courthouses. Can we provide public information desks to assist in addition to our court support services? How do we recognize those power dynamics that are inherent in our systems, and provide additional resources for folks who are coming in? We talked about lawyers for a day, and relaxing to the extent that we can some of our evidentiary requirements to make sure that we're explaining things to our self-represented parties. And some of these things have challenges, of course, but how can we sort of attempt to equalize the playing field a little bit for those people who are representing themselves?
Thanks, Karen. When you mentioned the courthouse thing, I do want to, last, I guess it was on Monday, during now Chief Justice Mullins' confirmation hearing, one of the comments made by Representative Stavstrom at the end of the hearing was, we have too many courthouses. And we need to have fewer courthouses to alleviate some of the staffing concerns. That's part of the discussion that we have to have about access to justice. I can understand the rationale for wanting to reduce the number of courthouses from a resources standpoint, but that then also creates a greater access to justice issue for people who can't get to those courthouses. It's kind of an interesting discussion because, again, Chris and I, a number of years ago on the civil side, made a proposal that we kind of divide the state up into 4 areas and set up for civil cases, larger civil cases, one place where they will all be tried, and that was not well received. So we put a fair amount of work into it.
Yes, we did.
So, but it sounds like that is something that at least some in the legislature are going to be looking at, and we just have to decide. We have to think about how we want to address that, not only from the branch's perspective, but from a access to justice perspective on this commission. And it may be that you say, well, fewer courthouses, if we have longer hours, that's a fair trade-off, or that fewer courthouses with more mobile resources is a good trade-off. But it's something that when I heard it, that was my first thought. How do we, if the legislature is going to go down that path and is going to push the branch in that way, how do we address that from an access standpoint? Does anybody else have anything for Karen or her committee? Or okay, thank you, Karen. The next is the committee I was not able to attend because it conflicted with one of the others, the library and the law school subcommittee. Spader?
Well, yes, we had our first meeting, and to be honest with you, I found the meeting quite overwhelming just because of the amount of and the quality of the committee members. You know, in preparation for the meeting, I went through, the past 10 years of subcommittee meetings from the previous version of the committee, which was more of a public library, educational sense with law library. And the charge this time is law libraries and law schools. In just looking at the successes that the previous committee had created, and some of those members are members on the committee, and they reported about, hey, here's what we did before, and outreach to librarians in the public and what resources they need to help people who come into those libraries. Things that we put onto the judicial branch website for access to judge and justice that came out of the previous version of this committee. And some of the members on the committee were members of the old committee. And, I kind of expected a first meeting that was kind of just introductory. Here's who I am. And the meeting just started right off with ideas being thrown out faster than we could type them for the minutes. It was just the committee had a number of law librarians on it who, as a resource, they're dealing with a lot of the people who come into the courthouse. That's where the clerk's office will send people a lot of times. So they are, with the clerks, they are kind of the front-facing group that's interacting with a lot of the people who are coming into the courthouses with these issues and with these questions. And things that even, as an attorney for a number of years, as a judge for a number of years, and dealing with a number of stuff reps, some of the issues that were being discussed, like simple things that we don't think about, is just the difficulty a member of the public has with even identifying the cause of action. Like, it's things that were brought to the committee members' attentions from the law librarians and how they're seeing things on the ground that give us ideas on what we can be addressing and how to meet those needs with education. But it was just I thought a very good first meeting of idea generation. And I've always appreciated our law librarians anyway, but it just gives me even more appreciation for them. And we had some of our law school deans as part of the group too that talked about the way they're educating their students to meet those needs. And look, we can't, as a judicial branch, say, Yale, I need you to do this, Quinnipiac, I need you to do this. But they started saying, hey, here's the different resources that we are creating and the way we're educating our students and how they can meet some of these needs, to start having that dialogue of what needs are being seen in the courthouse. And those resources may already be there to meet the needs, but we're not aware of them. Even as a judge, I'm not aware a lot of times of the needs. People present needs in front of me, and maybe I'm not educated enough to know which resources are out there. So, in terms of educating all of our users, from our mediators, our judges, our clerks, our law librarians, to some of those resources to meet those needs, was just a moving part of the discussion. I think there's a lot of work in our future, but I think we had a good first step as far as having the means to identify some of those needs. And I just really thank the chair for putting a number of people on this committee that I think will make some results about.
What do you think? We can respond to your question. Is it correct that the kind of job of the law librarian has changed dramatically over the years? Like, I remember as a younger attorney going to the law library in 95 Washington and talking to the law librarian, and there were only lawyers there. And my sense is that law librarians today spend much more of the time with self-represented parties than you do with lawyers. Is that fair?
That's a good way to say it. I wouldn't say the job has changed. It's always been to address the research needs or information needs of the patron. It's the patron who's changed. The judges, you have things at your desktop now. You're not coming into us to request things. It is over 90% self-rep patrons that are coming in looking for assistance at all educational levels.
And they don't have that same kind of background that lawyers or
They have
judges.
no background
So,
involved now.
so I've always felt that the law librarians have the most substantive and intense interaction with self-represented parties than
Yeah.
the court, even compared to our clerks or our court services and at times very lengthy involvements with some of the parties. So it's a question of how we.
It's important to
Provide
recognize
resources.
that our users, we work very close with the court service centers,
Yeah.
and these users move between the two of us continually, because as their case progresses, there are certain things the court service center could provide, and then when they can't any longer, then they come to us.
Right. So it's a real challenge.
And it's an underappreciated
Yeah.
challenge. You know, it's like, we kind of all just know they exist, you know, as, you know, and attorneys know they exist. Sometimes they're like, hey, you know, the other side of my case went to the law library. What am I gonna get now for motions? They're gonna be taught up there. And that's not that they're being taught up there. It's like they're answering the questions, you know, but because they're answering the questions, they're a resource for us to find out what those questions are and how, and they've already been doing this as far as if anyone's gone to the law library section of the judicial branch website, the resources that are there are incredible. But it's kind of underappreciated, but they are that on the ground that can help us with what needs to be met.
Thank you, Judge Bader. And the last one is the Legal Aid Subcommittee and Judge Thomas.
Thank you. We had a really good meeting last Friday. Very engaged subcommittee of members who all had lots of ideas.
On a Friday afternoon, no?
So it's gonna be very impressive. Very plot. I realize that in retrospect. Much nicer about this. The general sense obviously is we started out with just trying to understand the data that's available in self-represented populations. And unsurprisingly, that's in the standard areas, housing, and trying to figure out exactly what data is out there so we're not recreating the wheel. And also a lot of our work, I think, or at least our initial discussions tend to overlap with, I think, the discussions that you're having in many of the other subcommittees, and that's probably natural. To some extent, there was a recognition that we wanted to see, how that data maybe could be broken out by geographical area in Connecticut. So Ariane, who I'm working with, was the committee's liaison, is going to try to obtain that information to follow up on the data we were able to share from the judicial branch. Statewide Legal Services was present, and so they were able to offer to share the data that they see on their end as to what calls are coming in, what the areas are of inquiry. And there was a desire, I think, among committee members to see how that process works. And how does somebody come in through the intake line? Where are they? They're referred internally. How does that work? And then if one of the charges of our subcommittee is to really look at the question of pro bono and modest needs individuals. And so then the question is, if you're over income eligibility for statewide legal services, but that's the place you call, what happens next and where could you be sent? And, I think one of the things we're looking at is to say, where are those possible points of referral? There was an expressed desire for field trips to some of the legal aid offices, so watch out for legal aid providers who may ask to come join you either virtually or in person. There was some interesting discussion about the work of the law librarians. So to the discussion that we had previously, one of our members indicated that, in the past week, they had handed out 32 writs of audita cordial, which is the emergency petition that a tenant might file to stop the last phase of the eviction, which is order that the marshal comes out and physically removes you from the apartment. And that was, an adjustment for, I think, law librarians from their maybe traditional historical. And so the question is, we had some interesting discussions about ways we could try to tie into that contact point to see if there are available resources. I think, Zach, some of the ideas that you talked about were ideas that we talked about in our committee, and I'd love to connect with you further and talk about those ideas. But is there a way of guiding a person through those forms or other forms in a way that's using technology while not over leveraging technology? And so there was certainly a desire within the committee to understand how our legal aid providers are using technology, but also a concern that we didn't want to see technology viewed as kind of a panacea or bomb to address all of these issues, understanding that there are lines that probably can't be crossed. We had some discussion about limited scope representation. So Krista was nice enough to share some data after the meeting, which we'll share with the subcommittee about the utilization of limited scope representation, whether that's something that members of the public are educated about, whether they're using it, and whether attorneys are filing those appearances. Again, out of a general goal, so as to understand, one, not to put more of a burden on our legal services providers, but also two, to understand how we might be able to better serve the modest means population, which is part of the charge of our subcommittee. A few other ideas that came out of our discussions, which overlap with other areas, were how forms are presented and the structure of certain courts that interface significantly with high levels of self-represented individuals. So I was interested in your discussion, Zach, about courts that are maybe reforming themselves to take more of a holistic or a multidisciplinary approach to the delivery of not just legal services, but also supportive services in the context of housing and foreclosure or some other critical area. And we did have some discussions around pro bono. We did have a brief discussion about mandatory pro bono. There was also some discussion around the use of plain language, and also just we closed with a general conversation around marketing the legal profession. Whether there's a general sense in some of these areas, some of it's about inability to access or have the resources to obtain counsel. Some of it's also just believing that you're better off doing it yourself on DIY culture. And were there ways that we could help promote education about the importance of retaining counsel with the understanding that maybe you're balancing a $5,000 expenditure on a retainer agreement, a retainer fee is in competition with repairs to a car that's barely running, or a weekly daycare bill that's probably eating up a significant portion of your weekly income. And so trying to understand why that investment is worth it is probably some education that us or other entities, perhaps the Bar Association, can try to do to get people to understand that you wouldn't go in and do your own surgery. You certainly should represent yourself if you're able to put before counsel in some of these critical areas. So Ariana and I are going through the process of collecting the additional data that members have requested. We'll share those. Our overall goal is to try to identify a couple of finite projects that we can work on. Again, that are supplemental with the efforts that are already done, not placing an additional burden on our legal services providers, while at the same time producing something hopefully tangible that represents progress in the overall charge of ourselves. So thank you all. Many questions.
Any questions for Judge Thomas? Or okay, thank you. And that's a nice segue to the next item on the agenda, which is also about gathering data. And that's a discussion of the Connecticut Bar Foundation's Legal Needs Assessment Project. And I asked Ed Heath to provide us with some information on where that stands and where it's going. Ed?
Thanks, Judge. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head nodding. That sounds good. I'm just going to jump right into the assessment itself. I assume everyone here is familiar with the Connecticut Bar Foundation. I'll just say that if you're not familiar with it and you have questions about it, I'm happy to talk to anyone offline about that. But I know most of you are either involved because you've been on the board or are on the board or are fellows and the like, and are great participators in the work of the foundation. So turning to the assessment itself, back in this summer, back in June, the CBF engaged an entity called the Connecticut Data Collaborative to conduct the assessment. And the Data Collaborative, if you're not familiar with it, is a nonprofit that's based here in Connecticut. I think it's based in Glastonbury, but it provides data analysis, data support, and just generally data to nonprofits, state agencies, and businesses across the state. With respect to the assessment itself, the goals are threefold. First, we want to understand the areas of law that are most in demand for our low-income individuals in the state. Second, we want to look at the entire civil legal aid system, I should say, in Connecticut and understand where it's had successes and where it continues to face challenges. And then finally, we want to be able to offer recommendations to improve the system overall. I understand that the final report will include an economic impact assessment of the legal aid system in the state, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But we're just about wrapping up the first phase of the project, which is focused on collecting information, and we've collected information from the state's 11 legal aid organizations, the Connecticut Bar Foundation members, board members, as well as stakeholders in this process, such as the judicial branch, Connecticut's law schools, and the State Bar Association. At this point, I believe that the Data Collaborative has conducted 3 or 4 individual meetings with each of the organizations. It's also conducted 3 in-person group workshops to get information and also help prioritize the information. One of the other things that they've done, and please don't ask me to explain the details of this, but they've created individual logic models for each of the surveyed organizations. And the idea behind those logic models is to make sure that the data that's been captured is the data that's most impactful to the work that we're doing, but also designed to ensure that there's continuity across the data that we're getting from the different sources, so that we're not getting different data that doesn't match up when we ultimately come down to the process of finalizing the report. But once that's fully wrapped up, which I think will happen in the next couple of weeks, we're going to turn to the University of New Hampshire Survey Center, and they're going to be designing the survey using the research that's collected, and then the Survey Center is going to conduct the survey itself. I think that's going to take a couple of months to design and to execute on, but once they've completed that, the survey results are going to go back to the CT Data Collaborative, who then compile it and prepare a draft final report for us. That separately, or I should say, kind of along the same track, the Bar Foundation is going to be working with an entity called Downstream Strategies to conduct that economic impact assessment. And then the goal is to have a final report that rolls up all of that work to be completed around May of 2025. Before I stop, I should just add that Angela Schlingheid, who's the CBF's relatively new executive director, has asked me to let everyone know that if anyone wants more detailed information than this about the assessment, we're happy to meet and to share that, and happy to provide updates, Judge Bright, as that process goes along to this committee generally.
Thanks, Ed. I had one question. The economic impact piece of it, is that looking at what the economic cost of making changes would be, or the economic impact of not making changes, or a combination of that?
Yeah, my understanding is it's not going to focus on the changes, but it's going to focus on the existing economic impact of the civil legal aid system.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. So that kind of brings us to kind of where we go from here. And the next item on the agenda was the discussion of the future Access to Justice Conference. I mentioned this at our first meeting, that I would like us to have some firm goals and goalposts, and not just aim to prepare a report at the end of the day from the commission, but actually have projects that we are going to undertake, and at a conference at some point, not discuss what projects we should do, but what projects we have done and where we need further support from the bar, the bench, the legislature, the executive branch, the public, communities. So ideally, we would have the needs assessment first, and that information, then we would go from there and build. But I don't want to put our work on hold until May of 2025. So what I'd like to see all of the subcommittees do is start thinking about projects that we can do or are interested in exploring further. And as I mentioned last time, as I mentioned at the subcommittee meetings, I hope people think outside the box on coming up with ideas. It may be that the ideas are too ambitious and we don't have the funding or the resources to employ them, but let's come up with the ideas and then explore what is doable. I'd rather do it that way than just say, here are the limitations, because it's only when you think without limitations that you come up with kind of the groundbreaking ideas. And certainly with the resources from the National Center and things that have been done, a lot of these ideas we would need to start from scratch, build off the work that others have done, build off the work that prior committees of this commission have done in prior years. So, but I think that if we can start going down that road and if those subcommittees can start developing these ideas, maybe by the time the CBF work is done in the spring of 2025, we will have crystallized ideas that we can then see how they fit with what the needs assessment is. And I doubt that we will be able to implement every idea that we have, no matter how good they all are. So maybe that's a good way for us to fit and say, okay, these are the 5 ideas that the pro bono subcommittee had, and these 3 make the most sense in terms of where the needs are coming out of that needs assessment. So that's kind of, I hope, where the subcommittees will go and take your work. And then if that's kind of where we are in the springtime, I'm interested in what people's thoughts are about when we should be thinking about a Access to Justice conference where we can not only just have the ideas, but have some of them implemented and or at least along the way to implementation. On that, I don't want to write checks that we can't cash, so I want to be realistic about this.
If you're going to tie it to the CVS report, I think you're looking at least fall of 2025.
Yeah, I was thinking either fall of 2025 or spring of 2026. It might be that we talk about spring of 2026 with the expectation that, that we're not going to go a year and a half before we actually do anything. But again, this is where we're going to unveil and explain everybody the things that we have been doing, the additional things we want to do. That seem doable to people?
Yeah, Judge, I was thinking spring 2026 as much as I'd love to do fall 2025. My worry is if we want to use the needs assessment in our work, and I think we really should, then there's always the risk that it's delayed by a month or 2 or 3, which could put us in a real cramp for getting ourselves ready for the fall.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let me get Zach, you're here. Have you worked with other states that have done kind of an Access to Justice conference like this or we're talking about? And
Yeah, although they tend to wrap around more training opportunities.
okay,
It's either for judges or frontline staff.
yeah,
Or the national projects and national programs or like Equal Justice Conference and things like that are where you see more of the, here's what we've done and let's tell you about it kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
we certainly can include that as part of a statewide conference in terms of training and the like.
Yeah.
All right, so is everybody comfortable with that concept of kind of for each of the subcommittees? Let's start doing work with the idea that we're going to start putting things in place and have concrete deliverables that will be proud to explain to people by the spring of 2026. Good. All right, so the next thing is, these types of conferences don't come together on their own. We should have a committee that's going to be a conference planning committee that will coordinate with all the subcommittees, kind what the content of the conference is going to be, but also deal with all the logistics that go along with running a successful conference. So I don't think that we need to decide today who is going to be on that conference committee. I would ask people to think about it. And if you are interested in being on the conference committee, please reach out to me or Nicole and let us know that you're interested. And then if necessary, I'll start contacting people who I think would be good on it. That's so we don't have enough time, because I only ask people who don't have enough time to do these things, because I know they'll get it done. So think about that. I would like to, in the next month, certainly by the end of this year, have our conference committee in place to begin kind of that work and working with all of the subcommittees on planning a very successful conference in spring of 2026.
Judge Wright,
Yeah.
the conference planning committee, are you looking for only people that are already on the Access to Justice Commission, or
No.
people who?
And right, if you have suggestions of other people you want to volunteer, that's fine. Yeah, happy to have people who, particularly if there's people who have planned these types of events before. Ashley, there's somebody who you want to throw on?
The thought came to mind.
Yeah, so yeah. These, and again, there's going to be a number of pieces to it, both logistical and substantive. So if you say, hey, I'm happy to do the substantive piece, but don't ask me to pick out a location for it, that's fine too. We're not going to ask everybody to do everything. That's the last item we had on the agenda. Does anybody have anything else? Okay, I like to keep the meetings to about an hour. That's what we've done. Subcommittees, go ahead and plan things. Nicole, in terms of the next meeting of this conference, we're gonna try to set up a calendar for 2025 where we'll have the 4 meetings scheduled so everybody will know when they are in advance. So I expect we'll do one in January, then one in April, and then one maybe in June to avoid July and August, and then again in the fall. Yeah, I think Thursday afternoon seems to work for most people, so that's what we'll try to do. And in the meantime, subcommittees can be in between, and then we gotta just kind of keep the ball rolling in all the areas. And if you do see that there's overlap, I would encourage the subcommittees to talk to each other and figure out ways to make sure you're not duplicating each other's work and extending more effort than you need to on any project. Okay. And lastly, Paul Zach for everything. All right. Thank you all. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Second. All right. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.